have a lot of expertise in this room. You don't just have to ask questions. You can also comment on what you've heard as we try now to focus on that key question of the solutions. We've had the diagnosis of the problem. How do we solve it? And how can these reports help us? That will be the focus, as I say, come out to all of you in a little while. But Pushpam, you've been listening to everything that's been said. I know you've done some studies as well and got some quite staggering numbers as well for the cost of action versus the cost of inaction. A reaction, please, to what you've heard. And if we can now move into the next stage of our discussion. Before we come to the solutions, what do you think now are the most difficult challenges, the most important challenges that we face if we are to make progress? Because everyone said we can do it. Ethiopia, there's going to be a screening of a film tonight, ladies and gentlemen, about Ethiopia. You'll hear about it later. What are the challenges we face if we are to achieve these benefits and mitigate the damage we've already done?
Thanks, Becky. Thanks very much. Happy to be here. See, the economics is very clear that cost of action is much lower than the cost of inaction. From one of the working group reports from ELD, what we did, we focused on Africa for 54 countries. And we found that even a narrow subset of the cost of land degradation is more than 12% of the combined GDP of entire Africa, 12%. But if you want to stop the erosion of soil, it takes just slightly more than 1% of GDP. So you can see the cost which is going to inflict the society in various ways is much more higher than the cost of inaction. Now the problem is why it is not happening, why the investable funds are not being diverted, why the investors are not going to put their money. One of the major problems is the short myopic vision of the policymakers. They think that, I mean, when I say policymakers, I mean the private players, the actors who are into the business of investment in the land management practices. Their time horizon is very short. And that is where they think, oh no, not doing anything is going to give us a big return, which is absolutely wrong. Secondly, at least coming from Africa, I can tell you, governance of land management remains a big issue. Secondly, and probably the third point I would like to add, the kind of land tenure system we have, it's a kind of absentee landlordism. You are the owner, I'm the cultivator, for example. I have no incentive because what I'm interested in maximizing the current revenue. What will happen after 20 years from now, on which our study is based and a lot of these numbers are based, I mean, that does not hold for those guys who are doing or who are engaged in the tilling practice. So, the institutions, governance, economics is clear. At least ELD has given one more evidence that economics of land degradation is in favor of conservation, at least coming from 54 countries of Africa, the report says.
Thank you very much, because lots already to discuss. Monique, perhaps I could come to you to reverse the order of our opening presentations. In terms of the challenge now, how do you see it? Because you said those solutions are there. How do we identify, what is it we need to address? And on this question of, is it myopia? Is it short-termism? Is it a lack of governance or a lack of capacity in some way that is keeping this issue from being where you say it is in the SDGs, and yet many affected countries are not taking the sort of action we heard about in Ethiopia? Why not?
Well, I think there are many reasons. For example, in Europe, when you talk about food security, in Europe or in the US, when you see your supermarket, you do not understand exactly what we are talking about. Although what the Europeans do not know, for many of them, is how much already the food is coming from the outside. 40% of everything that we consume in Europe comes from outside. which, by the way, is a huge problem in terms of food security at one point. But that is our first awareness raising, I would say, in the developed countries, where the relation with food actually is a relation with the supermarket. Makes it complicated. The second problem is actually the question of land rights. And that is certainly one of the issues which makes it very complicated to find solutions. On this item, we are today currently working on putting what we call a land degradation neutrality fund, which will aim to restore 12 million hectares per year. And we are looking at raising $2 billion a year, next 30 billion in 50 years. Actually, the main problem is not to find the money. We have found investors, impact investors, who are ready. Today, the main problem we have is to find the land. Yes, because there is no way that we go for land grabbing, or that we need to know when the country tells us, oh, that's great, come in my country, you have 2 million hectares here, you can restore. To whom does that land belong? I mean, we cannot just make a deal like that. And so today, the main problem is to identify the owner and the tenants of those 12 million hectares that we are ready to finance through investors that are ready to put their money behind that thing. At the global level, let me be also clear, why is it not of so much interest? It is not of so much interest because there is not much technology to sell. And clearly, compared to the discussion into the field of energy, where you have all kinds of technology that are of importance to be solved, here most of the land rehabilitation that you can do is just labor. And so not so many people are interested into that because there is no return in terms of the economic.
But it is very striking. There isn't the technology to sell, so maybe not the business opportunities there, but there are, as the reports show, business opportunities and indeed costs for business who rely on access to raw materials, to land, those sectors for whom land is very important. There are very direct impacts, the food industry obviously being one of them. So maybe there isn't the technology, but maybe the business case, we'll come back to the discussion, maybe the business case is a bit more complicated and needs explaining. Danielle, from your perspective, you talked about, you made the reference to the SDG goals and you talked about implementation. What is the key challenge now for you in terms of the implementation of all this?
Well, first of all, I would like to say, the first issue was, you were mentioning that the biggest challenge, I think the biggest challenge that we have is raising awareness. Yeah. This is why we ELD can really play a role, because we feel sometimes that other environmental issues are more pressing, but no one has realized the importance of land degradation and also the benefits of it. Implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals has to take place at two levels. First of all, we have the international commitment. We are waiting for the official endorsement in days, but then we have to implement them at EU level. And we have seen that this is not just an issue for developing countries, but for developed countries. And in particular, in the EU, we have a serious issue in many member states. We need to see that we are working on this right now at the Commission level. How do we integrate the Sustainable Development Goals within our EU 2020 agenda? We are going to review it next year. Should we introduce a special indicator within our EU 2020 goals? We have instruments. We need to raise this with the member states, work ongoing in this area, but I think it's going to be the most important issue.
And an interesting point there, because that word we've already heard many times today, holistic approach, transdisciplinary approach, is something very much underlined by the reports. How do you do that in practice? Very easy to say, not always so easy to do. For you, Christina, the key challenges, the most important challenges we face now?
Well, I think we have challenges at different levels, as I was saying earlier, and I think we have a challenge at global level where we have to take global action and see that now in 2 weeks the SDGs are brought on their way. We have the UNCCD COP coming up as well. So important decisions are to be taken at that level. But then we come to national level. We have to come to implementation at different levels there. There's the sort of national policy that needs to be more geared towards what is happening within the agriculture sector and focusing on soils. I think in many of the developing countries, agriculture has really been a forgotten sector. Not much money has been channeled into agriculture research or into agriculture activities. So I would say since 2008 that has been picking up again. So that's one of the areas. But then it comes to the implementation, of course, you have to see how that is implemented on the ground, and it's very easy to say here's a right activity or a right technology, but first of all it has to fit into farmer circumstances, and then it has to be surrounded by sort of enabling conditions as well. Land tenure was mentioned already beforehand, but there are also social and cultural circumstances which have to be considered. The challenges there are huge. Climate change, or for many farmers, they have of course short-term benefits in mind, because it's more about maybe survivor looking, for the next year, the next 2 years. So kind of, seeing where the right door openers, so to say, to make a shift in awareness among farmers as well. So really, I think the challenges are at many levels. That we have.
And we'll come back perhaps to how the different levels respond. And Pushpam, I'd like to come back later in a moment to you with a thought. This point Christina makes there about cultural differences, social differences, and the question that came into my mind, and I would have loved to have asked Tefera, but I don't think the technology would have allowed it, was the degree to which you can say, okay, Ethiopia, some great examples of what can be achieved. To what extent can you take that and replicate that elsewhere? So how much is it a question of just an inspiration to say you can do it? How much is it a sort of template, if you like, for what to do? But we'll come back in a minute. Now, if I could just ask you on this question of why, if it's so important, it is not higher on the political agenda. Monique said earlier, everything we want to achieve, everything goes back to access to productive land. Pushpam says it's myopia, short-termism. Do you think that's the problem? I mean, I'm struck by what you said at the beginning about this is universal. Tend to think of it as a developing country issue, but it's something on our own doorstep. Why do we struggle?
Well, I think we struggle for many of the reasons that have been raised so far. I think we have perhaps not been successful up till now in putting on the table the implications that it has. This is what the report is trying to show, that sustainable land management is critical. It's not only an environmental issue, it has to deal with many of the political challenges that we have. It was mentioned migration, we have climate change, but we have a lot of issues which are linked to this. Second, I think it is also an opportunity. If we tackle appropriately, we have collective, we have global responsibility. I think we can really improve the situation. Why has not it happened so far? Has there not been enough political will to put this on top of the agenda? Has it been more short term? There is not lack of money, but why haven't investors been mobilized? I think we have to assume some collective responsibility. It's not so easy as to say, I think the first thing, as I say, is to draw the awareness. The second thing is to have some goals. We have now the Sustainable Development Goals. We have our Environment Action Plan. third is we need a common strategy. We have not been able at European level to have the EU soils directive. For 8 years, we've been struggling to get an agreement at EU level. Countries were saying this is subsidiarity. Don't get involved. So I think we have to ask each other at the Commission level, have we been doing enough? Have we put this really at the top of the agenda? All of these things, I think there is probably some shared responsibility. But I don't think the important thing is the past. I think the important thing is that now we are putting the ELD. And we are saying, whatever has happened in the past, I think you're saying, you should pull up your socks.
And get on with it.
Roll
Roll
your
your
sleeves.
sleeves.
Roll your sleeves up. We need to get to work to solve this issue. At local level, at regional level, national, European, and global level. We need to associate investors. We need to work with the local communities. And we need also, I think, with the countries which are most affected, if there is not a problem with investment, if there's not a problem, why aren't they putting in place this policy? So I think the element of short-term versus long-term also comes into account. But I think it would be very simplistic to say the reason why is there's some collective responsibility, and I'm not saying.
And as you say, looking forward, Pushpam, it is a goal, Sustainable Development Goals. There were many things people wanted. It's not a sub-target. It is one of the goals. It is referred to explicitly. So there is now a platform to really make progress. For you, I mean, it's interesting what Danielle was saying there about this relevance for every other policy area. Perhaps people weren't alive to that. And just a word, if you could, in terms of when you look at the solutions, and we're talking about solutions, on this question of the degree to which one country can look to another and take the lessons of what they've done, the lessons of Ethiopia. And I think we have Mark Dodd in the room, producer of the film you're going to hear more about later on. I don't know whether wants to contribute in terms of the lessons we learned from Ethiopia. To what extent can we take those really successful case studies, as it were, and say, okay, we have the answers?
Thanks very much. No, I'm still in the problem side. Right. I will come to the solution in a minute.
Okay.
The first is, of course, raising awareness. Second is scientific evidence. I don't know whether people in this room would believe to go to the country and say how much area is degraded. The response would vary 5%, somebody, I don't know, 55%, somebody will say 40%. We don't have credible scientific assessments. I mean, somehow we have, thanks to IPCC or few initiative for biodiversity, the UNFCCC or CBD, but even CCD has come out with numbers, but we can add, I mean, we can prioritize this and can create more scientific assessment of degraded land. What happens in the absence of a credible assessment? Some advocacy group, some non-scientific group come out with 90% land we are going to lose in 10 years, and nobody trusts you. Because 90% land, if it is going to lose, it is alarming. I mean, so let's have a very credible, objective assessment. And then, so that is the second part. Third part is, broadly speaking, aligning the conservation and development agenda. Land degradation, the indirect drivers of desertification, you have trade, you have faulty investment patterns, you have devaluation of exchange rate, you have socio-economic dynamics like migration, a large number of drought-prone areas. People are out migrating from that region, and that is also creating problems in other parts of the world. What I'm trying to say that those investment trade design has to be linked with the use of land and the process of land degradation. Third thing which I would like to mention here, we are very happy that the way SDG discourse is happening right now, and next week in New York, member states hopefully will adopt them. And this is the first time that 17 goals, they're not a shopping list. They are very, you can see the interlinkages. So goal number 3, human health, and goal number 15, the environment and biodiversity. Goal number 17, international cooperation. The entire document and 169 indicators, they are talking about the interdependence of biodiversity, land degradation, and the climate change. One more thing here. It is very sad situation, but that is the fact that top 1 billion people, top one, the richest, top 1% out of 7 billion, they are emitting 45 to 50% emission. And the rock bottom poorest 1 billion, they are responsible for 5% of emission. So top one, half, rock bottom, 5%. But this 1%, people are going to be the foremost victim of land degradation, drought, soil salinity, waterlogging, and also abandoning the land in many parts of the world, especially in the coastal areas. So the action has to recognize the linkages of climate change and the land degradation. And then the right action, whether it is transport technology or finance or having a very good champion of the cause or piloting the idea so that what you are talking in terms of Ethiopia can be upscaled in sub-Saharan Africa or Amazonia, or what, for example, Indians or Bangladesh people are doing can be upscaled in entire South Asia, and similarly for Southeast Asia.
So that crucial question Jafera raised about the scaling up. Before I go out into the audience, and thank you, lots of points to come back on, and also underlining there, the ELD report, of course, bringing, I mentioned earlier, the video mentioned the science together with the policymakers, with the business sector, that science base. So very important if the arguments you are making, and those wonderful statistics, Monique, that you started with about the cost of a cup of coffee or the cost of a taxi in terms of land use. Do you want to react at all to what you said? And just if you could, a word on this question of the degree to which we can learn from those inspirational cases.
So maybe on the science, I will have a little different view, which has been expressed. Science exists. The science on this question is actually multiple, maybe too much. You have, but not well organized. Every country has an institute on land issue. What does not exist is where it comes together. And I'd like to say that about that, actually with the support of the European Commission, we are now doing a global land outlook, which is going to be a complete vision of all aspects linked to land, brought into one document, and trying to gather all that science to make sure that everybody can get the full picture. That is one. Second, for the ones who are interested by the science, IPBES is not doing a land degradation assessment, so there will be a new assessment of global one. And third, Substar, which is the science body of the climate change, has decided also to do a first land assessment linked to the climate issue. So this is coming all together in terms of science. So that's one thing. Now, on the private sector, I just wanted also to say something that what we see also is that the private sector, which is busy into agriculture or mining, or are starting to get worried about the question of land. And I would like first to recognize that there are some private companies here in the room, and also to recognize that actually the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, so which is the association of the private sector, actually has taken also this question of land degradation neutrality in their Action 2020, and Global Compact is also going now to use it to measure the progress of private sector. So those companies which are active in the field, they are also putting their act together into that.
So question, how do we get more of them to do it in the future? Christine, did you want to add anything before I go out to the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the question you had earlier on the lessons learned from countries. I think what we need are, and what we already have as well, are networks where you link up people, institutions, where you link up countries' experiences, like ELD, for example, has been doing that with the different case studies and bringing people together. They're also, now I was talking about this global program that we have started. One of the important elements is here to have this exchange also between the countries and the different experiences. Of course, one practice that you work on in Burkina Faso may not apply in the same way to Kenya, but the experiences that can be shared of how they're applied, how they're brought up to scale, and so on. And I think this networking and this linking is a very, very important issue. And there are several institutions. We have VOCAD, we have TECA, we have databases of different technologies, but that's something that really needs to be fostered more so that lessons learned can be shared.
So we don't reinvent the wheel every time. People can benefit from each other's experience. Lots still to discuss. Any questions or comments to what you've heard so far? Does anybody want to join in? And please, could you introduce yourself for my sake and for the panel? Thank you.
Yes, so good morning, everybody. My name is Balázs Horváth. I work for the European Environmental Bureau, which is a European NGO representing 170 local and national NGOs. We've been supporting for long years European initiatives on the European protection of soils, which, as we heard from Mr. Kaleha, was a failure so far because of different reasons. We are delighted to hear that the Commission is still thinking on the implementation of the 7th Environmental Action Programme and also the Millennium Development Goals issue, and we would like to support from a bottom-up approach with there is an initiative for People for Soil, which is coming up and trying to raise awareness and establish a network in Europe on civil organizations which support soil protection. So we would like to, I think the EU support this, and we think that this could support the Commission initiative. So my question is, we heard about these issues, but we lost a lot of years. So is there any concrete timelines or next steps which the Commission is planning?
Okay, thank you very much. And also there, underlining that importance of mobilizing communities that we heard about from Tefera as being absolutely central earlier. Other questions or comments? I'll take a few in the interest of time management. Come to you next.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Claire. I'm coming from France, Paris, from the French National Institute of Research and Agriculture. And I was also the Secretary General of a good scientific conference taking place at UNESCO and University Clinique in July in Paris. I just wanted to come back to Monique's comments and also to your comments on the issue of science. I think that obviously a lot of science exists, but I wanted to mention that through this conference in Paris, but and also another conference in Montpellier in March, the scientific program is now being launched, and so hopefully we will be launched together with the action plan through the Lima Paris Action Plan in December on carbon sequestration in soils. And perhaps you know that there are already a lot of contacts with the European Commission, states, research programs, and research networks, and universities. And I think that one of the main targets of this scientific program will be to be able not only to identify the good practice at the good places, but also identify both how to scale up practices, but also the good tools to monitor and to follow the different measures that we have to
Thank you. Thank you very much. So question there, how do we use these networks as effectively as possible in this? Please, Madam.
Thank you. I'm Lindsay Stringer from the University of Leeds in the UK. I'd just like to follow up again on the science question, following up particularly on Bush perhaps point, but also a comment made by Monique. I completely agree with Monique, there's loads of science out there. But in the interest of resource use efficiency, why are we having 3 assessments? Who's going to join them up? You know, it doesn't seem like a good use of resources for each different UN convention to be doing its own assessment. We've highlighted the need for integrated solutions. We've highlighted the need that everything's connected and needs cooperation. So why isn't the investment and the politics taking the same kind of line of action as it is in the discourse?
Thank you very much. We can't have the joined up assessment, so we can have the joined up action. One more, and then we'll come back.
Thank you. My name is Alicia Elisabeth. I'm a senior researcher at the Center for Development Research, University of Bonn in Germany. So you had a very good question about, so you know, a lot of information that action is worthwhile, but then why it's not happening is because of short-termism of myopia. And I'm afraid it may not be due to myopia only. A lot of land users and governments are very rational, and one of the reasons for land degradation still happening, our research shows that major cost of land degradation is because a major cost of land degradation is due to losses in ecosystem services, which are non-provisional ecosystem services. And when land users make investments in sustainable land management, they cannot internalize the benefits for addressing all these non-provisional ecosystem services, which are global public goods. And even individual governments cannot do that. So I agree with a lot of panelists who called for global action for addressing land degradation. Another second reason is that in many cases where even provisional losses in provisional services already justify action, but still not happening. There are a lot of barriers, like lack of market access, land tenure insecurity, a lot of different lack of access to credit and other issues. But what we find that in some, even when you address that, it may not automatically lead to sustainable land management, because for some land users, it may be a rational decision to degrade land, because doing that, they extract resources and reinvest those resources into other areas with even higher returns. For example, their children's education. So the point is, it's a very complicated situation, so we need to consider all the different elements in the analysis.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's come back. And if I could just take and broaden out a little bit, just in the interest of time, because we have a lot of ground still to cover. This question about the timeline, when will things happen? And I suppose my question related to that, and I say broadening it out a bit, is in terms of what are the key ingredients of an effective approach? And Monique, perhaps I could start with you. Do we need new tools? Do we need to use what we have? But we talked about the science side of it. We'll come back to the joined up question in a moment, if I might. But do we need to just use what we have? The ELD reports provide us with tools. How do we make sure that we get these effective strategies? What are the key ingredients? Thought from you first, and what is the time? Do we need to set some deadlines here in order to make progress?
Well, I think that one of the problems is linked to the convention I am managing.
It's a very honest reply.
You see, to the big difference of the two other Rio conventions, the biodiversity and the climate one, the two others have given themselves quantitative objectives.
Yeah.
So there was something to follow. There were progress, and because there was a quantification, there could be a target. This convention has had no target, no nothing. So blah blah. So that's why I have been fighting so much to get the LDN target. Because now, what does it mean? It means that every country in the world, and they are going to agree to that, we have to make its planification of what does it mean that a country becomes land degradation neutral. And of course, if you put yourself with a target, then you have to put the means to make sure that you're going to implement in order to get to whatever target you have given yourself. So I am very much hoping that this game of putting a target and a plan will then help countries, in particular in the poorest countries, then to go and address the donor community, because they will have a plan of what type of land they have to restore, for what kind of benefit and all that. And progress will be measured and will be publicized, because we give reports to the General Assembly of the UN anyway every year. So then it starts a dynamic, which is a new type of dynamic and which was not existing in the.
Can we get onto a more virtuous circle, if you like? Then we can use the tools and the instruments we have. So we are at a very important moment. She has something to capitalize on now as she goes around the world making the case. But in your terms, the key ingredients of an effective implementation strategy now, Danielle, is it regulations? Is it new incentives? Earlier we heard money's not the problem, land rights is the problem. Is it capacity building, enabling countries, giving them the capacity to do these things that they may not have? Where should the focus be, do you think?
I think we need three things. First of all, it's very important was the target. When you have a target, you have a sense of direction. We have the sustainable
I'm
goals.
not sure that mic is working anymore. Hang on, try.
It's because I would have.
Ah, hang on.
No, it's working. It's working.
You've got it. There we are.
I will shout.
There we are.
So I think we need three things. First of all, the target. The target gives you the sense of direction. Jack Welch, I don't know if I should quote him. He used to say, "No targets, no business." If you have a target, you know where to go. We will have a target avoiding further land degradation, sustainable development. We will have the COP21 conference, which has a very important impact, because out of the climate change, there are going to be adaptation measures. And this is important. We have at EU level our environmental action program, which has the 2020 also objectives and which is compatible with these targets. And we have also something very important, which is this year is the International Year of Soils, which is also important to resolve. First element, sense of direction. Second element, you need a process. And the process needs to include science, needs to include policymakers, and needs to include business. And through this process, we can have the engagement of the private sector, the political commitment of policymakers to say, I have to deliver the agreed targets. You can have the networks, you can think of financial instruments, you can have a comprehensive process which has to take us to meeting these targets. But then you still need a third thing, and this is the monitoring. How are we going to monitor progress? How are we going to say, to check if member states are delivering the commitments? If we are able to implement these three things, and from the discussions, I said I am in my 10th day in the new job, from the discussions I see, this has not been the case so far. If we are able to have a credible, ambitious but realistic target, if we agree on a process to delivering this, showing awareness, networking with the business community, with policymakers, with the science. On the science, I want to say, we have plenty of science and we have instruments. Very few people know the enormous amount of information that we are getting, for example, from our European satellite capacity. We have instruments like Copernicus. Copernicus is giving us daily 8 terabytes of information on the states of our European satellite Earth observation and monitoring system. We need also to use better this data, to exploit them better, to look at the impact. So I think there's a lot of information, but if we have the target, if we have the process, and we put in place an effective monitoring system, I think the situation can.
And that can counter the myopia, because if you set some shorter, medium and long-term targets, and now people have signed up to it, they're signing up to it. Could you also say a word, Bushra, on capacity building? Because for the ELD reports, this is a very important side. The next phase is about training, about helping to develop that capacity. How important is it and what do we need to do?
Sure, that is a very important area. I mean, but again, on science.
Yeah, please.
Of course, the executive secretary has already mentioned the various initiatives, including the regional assessment of land degradation under IPBES. Science does exist, but here you need a slightly different kind of science. If the idea is to integrate land degradation into general economy, macroeconomic planning and development, then what you need to do, there is a lot of science coming from the site-specific, experiments. That if the soil erosion happens, what is the nutrient loss or moisture loss? And then the challenge is, how do you upscale? Because macroeconomic policy and planning, for example, monetary policy, fiscal policies, market-based instruments, they are not site-specific. They are regional or national level. I mean, so how, when you upscale the experimental plot 22 by 22 meters findings at the national level, what are the caveats? What are the assumptions which you are taking help of, and what you are losing, what you are gaining, whether your science will be credible? That is the kind of science you need if you want to integrate land degradation into national policy and planning. And that brings to your other questions, capacity development. That is the absolute need, I think. Again, my lens is from the poorer parts of the world, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Amazonia. In many countries, all of you know, I mean, yeah, the capacity is very, very basic, very, very basic. So this is a wonderful start, the ELD. I mean, this is for the first time probably at the regional and global level, the information has been organized, the economics layer has been added. So the conservation constituency is not bereft of economic sense, and that is what this report does. But now, how this report will be used? Because we can talk about SDG, they are very good lampposts, but the action will happen on the ground. Otherwise, you are not going to achieve the targets, let's say, whatever 169 target, indicators and goals. So, how the capacity is the real need, and in fact, the Commission or our colleague in UNCCD and all the UN agencies, they have to focus in a big way on the capacity development, because they are the guys who are going to take the action, influence the happenings on the ground, and it does not get happen. I mean, this room is fine. We can do a nice discourse and talk about science, but translating science into action would require huge amount of effort on capacity.
Thank you. And I'd like to pick on Mark Shower in a moment, who is the ELD Initiative Coordinator, and ask him what he wants people to do with this report after all the work that's gone into it, where you think we go from here. But Christina, in terms of where we go from here, and we've heard, issues like capacity, but it's not really so much about the money. The money can be found, according to Monique. It is more about the sort of other issues that we've raised. Land rights, obviously, a very complicated issue. Monique, I don't know whether you are finding any answers on that, but how do you see the ingredients of the most cost-effective strategy for addressing this?
Well, I believe it's a broad approach which needs to be taken. You really need to look at different aspects of it. Of course, it's sustainable land management, it's about practices, techniques, and so on, but then the enabling conditions, which land tenure is one of them, is a very important issue which needs to be addressed as well. And people have to be have the right to own their land, to farm the land, have the right to the land they farm as well. So that is one of the enabling conditions, I think, which is a precondition in a way towards a successful sustainable land management. Then there are other things as knowledge that we've been talking about. So you really need to look at a set of enabling conditions which are necessary at the local level. But then, of course, you also need to have rules and regulations. You need to have policies at the national level. If you don't have a soil policy, or if you don't have policies looking at addressing soil issues at the national level, then of course it becomes very difficult to actually implement activities on the ground level if they're not within a certain framework. So again, I think it's an interplay between different enabling conditions at the local level and at the national level. Of course, we can come to a global level.
Sure. Okay, that interplay, and it links really, and I haven't forgotten you, to your question about joined up assessments. Okay, got all this information out there. Why are there so many different things being done? And the question about, or the comment really about scientific networks. if we are to have this broad, holistic approach, multidisciplinary, etc., how do we actually achieve it, Monique? Because as I said at the beginning, it's something I think every debate I do in Brussels, people say, oh, we need joined up thinking. We need a joined up approach. Very easy to say, not always so easy to get different ministries, different departments working together. What for you is the key here? And why have we got such a multiplicity of different scientific initiatives in terms of evidence gathering, just to answer that specific point raised by the audience? A thought from you all on joined up thinking, then I'd like to come to Mark for a thought.
Okay, maybe to start with multiple assessment, I do not think there are multiple assessments. There is one assessment I know about, which is the one of IPDES. The exercise that UNCCD is pushing up is not an assessment. We are not going out with science. We are just putting all the science which exists together in a global outlook. So it's not an assessment, it's trying to publicize all this science. And as for the climate issue, it is on a very specific agenda item, which is what kind of indicators and type of work we have to do to make sure that we get indicators on adaptation measures in particular and sequestration of carbon into all the debate which will then allow countries to come for financing by the Green Plan. So it's right, but the only assessment, global assessment, which is going to take place is the one of IPDES. And actually, by the way, to answer that, I have refused, because it has been a debate for a long time, that UNCCD goes for its own scientific body like the two other convention, because my thinking is that since they are the two others, they can serve us as well. But I have to say that this point of view is not a point of view which is generally done, and unfortunately, this holistic approach you are talking about is only in meeting rooms you see it. Because as soon as we get out of the meeting rooms, we all go and do exactly the same. You see, if you take the Free Rio Convention, there was a fabulous financial instrument which was existing, which was the Global Environment Facility, which was linking all the problems. And what has happened is that every single person negotiating the climate change are saying, no, we need our financial instrument. And so now you have the Green Climate Fund going up. And I am sure that if tomorrow the land issue becomes something large, people are going to say, we need a land fund because, so actually, it's very difficult to do what you are talking about. The only thing we can dream about, which is feasible, and that's why, again, for us, it was so important to get this target of land degradation neutrality, is that you have a consultation at the level of all the parties of the government. Because I'd like just to add one thing. Here, everybody is mixing a little bit land and soil, but land is not soil, exactly. And for example, what is the urban take on land is something that has nothing to do with the soil productivity, and which belongs also to the economic of land. In Europe, for example, every 10 years, we seal the equivalent of shippers. It means it becomes concrete. So it's not just a question. So we are losing that much of land because of the cities, because of infrastructure. And so the debate is not just how do you use your land for sustainable land management, it's what is every part of the government, the national economy taking from the land.
Thank you for highlighting that. Pushpa, how do we take it, the holistic approach, out of the meeting room and into reality, given that the ELD reports warn that a fragmented approach, one of projects here, there, everywhere, can actually do more harm than good? because they have certain medicines. How do we make this a reality? As I say, it's so easy to do or to talk about, and Monique indicating there, talked about a lot, everyone agrees, but they go away and it doesn't happen.
Very simple, raise awareness and tell people what is at stake if we don't do this. I mean, this ELD, what it does, it gives you that kind of cost of action versus cost of inaction. And that is the entry point to raise awareness, especially to the development sides, because these guys think, oh, land is the bounty of nature or free gift of nature, as Adam Smith used to say, or David Ricardo would say that, oh, no problem. I mean, if there is a scarcity of land, the price will go up and farmers will be compelled to preserve it. So those kind of things are in the history. Now, the new insight, especially coming from this kind of work like ELD, is that if you don't act, see the kind of people who are at the receiving end, and I mean, whatever discipline, whatever initiative, the common goal and the numerator is welfare of the people, well-being of the people. And especially that well-being has more weightage if that is going to the poorest of the poor. And one more thing, most of the poor people, I mean, if you see the poverty maps, they are found to be in the dry land and the desert area of the world. And out of that, I'm talking about the chronic poor who is not just $1.25 less than that, but the person who is born as poor. He never passes that 1.25 magic bar in his entire life. And when he dies, he passes the poverty to the future generation. Those kind of characters and people are found more in the degraded land. And if you think, so there is an ethical dimension to it. So I think if we package our message, probably we have good chance to succeed.
Okay.
Take this discussion outside of the room.
How joined up is it now at national level? I mean, the EU, the Commission is in the middle of a big exercise in attempting more joined up thinking. I won't ask for a broad analysis yet, Danielle, of how successful it's being. But in this particular area, do you, within the German government, within the different ministries who are involved in this, is there joined up thinking? Is there joined up thinking at EU level, or do we need to do more? And then I'm going to come to Mark for a thought before I put you all on the spot. Christina first.
Well, of course it is a challenge. I mean, in our case, for example, we are the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, so our focus is mainly on work with developing countries, but of course we have to liaise on these issues with the Ministry of Agriculture as well, which then focuses much more on national issues or maybe on the European level. There are different philosophies sometimes as well, so you have to cross bridges there as well. However, I would say that you know, we do on specific issues and topics. Then we will have how do you call it, cross-ministerial discussions as well, because we do need to, of course, coordinate as well and have a common approach on when it comes to the big conventions, when it comes to EU regulations and so on. And that is something that is.
So it's beginning to happen. Danielle, is it happening?
Well, I would like to say, with this report, what we are doing is we are putting the figures on the table. We are showing this is a real problem. We are also highlighting the benefits. We are raising the awareness, but this is not enough. For this to change, we need now to go to the next step. That's what you are asking all of us. We need the next step at international level. Once we have the goals, we need to see how we are going to move forward. Are there going to be national plans which are going to be submitted to this target? And we need to deal with this at EU level also.
I'm going to ask you all in a moment what for each of you is that key next step if, and we do assume we get agreement on the SDGs, that seems to be done, a done deal, bigger question about the climate change talks, but for each of you what you think the most important priority is. But before we do that, Mark, I just wanted to ask you, because Pushpam and other panelists have referred rather eloquently to how these reports can help. What do you hope will happen now they're being launched? They're being launched as well, by the way, next week as well at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. So this is going global. What do you hope will happen next in terms of using these reports to help make progress?
I was part of a team and we created, I think, actually quite stunning numbers coming out of this. Was really, for me, was kind of surprising the amount of or the value which we are losing then really. And Pushpam is right that, okay, this is really an awareness raising tool as for now. But I think we can go further and not just do one big splash here, but we can, and hopefully prevent this report from sitting on some shelf and collecting just some dust there. Because when you're asking what might come, I can tell you what is already coming at us there, because we are already receiving requests for capacity building, for training, for working with decision makers on different levels there, and also intersectoral, meaning that different ministries would come together and work with us, and we can help them in developing ways forward and hopefully installing a more prominent place for investments or in sustainable land management, if you want, because you manage the or someone just mentioned the SDGs. ELD shows that it's efficient, that it pays off to invest in sustainable land management. And Monique mentioned this already. There is something very big coming at us from this SDG on sustainable land management, on land degradation neutrality. And ELD will help to facilitate this process there, will help to support the investments in this.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, we are almost out of time, but before we go, I want to put you all on the spot. And we started, the film said at the beginning, we're not at the mercy of this. We can do something. And you have all said in different ways, we can bring it under control. We can not only meet the challenge, but seize the opportunities. We heard the inspiration from Ethiopia, but for each of you, and I'll start with you, Christina, then Pushpam, then Danielle, and I'll give Monique the last word as we move into the international arena. If you had to identify one priority, one key next step in half a minute of all the things we've talked about, what for you is the most important thing we need to do to really make progress on this issue?
Sorry, but I do think it's two things.
If you do it in half a minute, I'll allow it.
Probably much more than that. First of all, I think one of the important things coming up now when the SDGs are approved is to look at the indicators, to look at the targets, because that's a huge job, a huge challenge coming up at country level, to define indicators, you know, which can be put into practice then as well. But then also on the other hand, I think a challenge or something that needs to be done is action by countries. We have to act. You have to look at, you know, what a country can bring into the discussion and make soils, again, a valuable resource which we all recognize as the most important production factor for agriculture.
Thank you very much. Pushpam, and you can have two. The half a minute is the strict rule.
I will read less than that. I mean, two things basically. SDG hopefully is going
Grab
to
your
be,
mic, sorry.
SDG is going to be accepted or embraced by the member states. Then I entirely agree with Christina. We have to see the indicators and link land degradation component into that. So that goes back to also the baseline target and indicators kind of thing. In UNEP, I didn't say much about that part. Two flagship initiatives, inclusive green economy and new inquiry of greening the financial systems. So in the borrowing, lending practices, the green bonds, the share prices of the corporations, the land degradation component should be inbuilt, and that at the conceptual level, it has been recognized that land degradation, the topsoil, is one of the natural, the important element of natural resources that should be there. So that is one. But the finally is how we sell the success stories. That basically we will have to pilot or commission lots of studies which has convincing power, and there are enough followers. We don't need only leaders, we need enough followers. And that can be done if we have good success story, and that goes to the second round of ELD.
Thank you, and that goes us back to where we started with the awareness issue. Daniel, your priority.
I think as soon as we have the endorsement of the sustainable goals, we expect the UNCCD will take the lead. Of course, we will need indicators, of course, we will need studies, but this is not the most important thing. The most important thing for the EU is to have a very strong commitment, followed by an action plan to implement these goals, both supporting the efforts outside the EU and also to come with a credible strategy. This is the most important thing, and this is where the Commission is going to be.
Thank you very much. Monique, you have the last word.
Well, for me, very clear in October, the LDN target being approved at the national level for all countries under UNCCE, and in December in Paris, have the land be part of the package, which is going to be approved, and why it is so important also is that I do think that most of the financial resources of the next 10 years in the development agenda are going to be taken by the climate agenda, and it is important, therefore, to be into the climate agenda.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed for a fascinating debate. This is the beginning, as I say, of an ongoing debate. They take it to New York next week and on from there. Before we close and I tell you about lunch, Chris Ray from the World Resources Institution is just going to say a couple